I once hit my brother for calling me pretty. For me as a small child, there was pretty and there was cool. They were opposites, there was no overlap, you couldn't be both. Pretty was girly, and for girls, I didn't want to be girly. I wanted to be cool. And so my big brother and I had this thing, where he would start to say, "You look pretty," and I would start to get mad at him until he added, "Pretty cool," and then I would call him again. But in this particular instance, I remember, my parents were in the process of enrolling me in a new private preschool with a dress code, and we were there so that I could try on some of their sample uniforms, which for girls were these frilly little dresses, navy blue with white lace. I adamantly hated dresses, lace, and everything girly, but I didn't really have a say in the matter. I put on the dress because someone told me to, and when I came out to show my parents, my brother, the snark bag, said, "You look pretty, pretty, pretty." So I hid it, because that's how you deal with things when you're 4. My reaction to being perceived as feminine had to adapt with the acquisition of social skills, but my core feelings and complete aversion to all things pretty or girly never changed. I did everything in my power to avoid being feminine. I always wore my hair down, because wearing it up was girly, until around middle school, when I decided to grow it up and donate it. And wearing it down was more girly than wearing it up, a principle that is still in effect to this day. I continued to refuse to wear any dresses or skirts, anything pink or with lace, any nail polish or jewelry, at least voluntarily. There were still those times when I would be forced into some costume for piano recitals or chorus concerts or the like, and then there would be huge fights with my mom where she would first try to convince me that in her outfit I looked cute or something, and when I still resisted, she would not so gradually escalate to yelling about what was appropriate or decent or respectable, while I desperately tried to scrounge up something that I still felt comfortable in. I would always lose. And then there were gifts from other people who didn't know me very well and assumed I'd like normal girl things, like hair accessories and fake flower making kits. Outright rejecting them would be rude, so I ended up with a closet full of jewelry making sets and a few skirts buried at the bottom of the drawers, tags still attached, because I could never bring myself to take the hit to my dignity and wear one. Once I got a pair of roller skates, and I loved skating so much I almost managed to get over the fact that they were Barbie themed, but only by constantly being on the defensive and telling anyone who so much as looked at them that they were a gift from someone who clearly didn't know me. It didn't help that this all happened in parallel with my brother's cisgender life. He got to wear suits to piano recitals and high holiday services, putting one on in 30 seconds while poking fun at me for taking 30 minutes to get ready, 29 of which were spent in a yelling match over whether my mom got to slather foundation on my face. Again, I would lose. For my brother's birthday, people got him chemistry sets and remote-control cars and all sorts of cool boy things that I was also interested in, but which he would get annoyed at me for touching. I think the worst contrast was his Boy Scouts versus my Girl Scouts. I still feel a lot of anger and bitterness about that disparity, about how we got lanyard making and babysitting badges while he got cycling and fire making badges, about how they got to go camping while we sat around braiding hair, and honestly, I don't want to relive it all here. Suffice it to say that it was the ultimate difference in gender stereotypes, and I was very definitely on the wrong side. As I grew into a teenager and gender began playing even more of a role in my life, I started to realize just how much I was on the wrong side. I didn't know anything about being transgender. I couldn't say with confidence that I was a boy or even that I wanted to be one. And at the time I thought it would mean wanting hormones and surgery, which seemed excessive. All I knew how to do was put more effort into further alienating myself from femininity, or in other words, embracing what I now know is called toxic masculinity. Not that I knew it was toxic at the time. I began not only avoiding and even actively fighting external, concrete symbols of femininity, like dresses and makeup, but changing my behavior, preferences, and even personality to be more masculine as well. I only let myself read books, listen to music, or enjoy TV shows that were masculine enough for me. I wasn't allowed to like Jane Austen novels, no matter how often they were recommended to me, but Hemingway was acceptable. Taylor Swift and Lady Gaga were out, classic rock was fine. I'd watch Say Yes to the Dress with my friends, but only because they liked it and I wanted to hang out with them. God forbid I show any interest myself. I also took it to heart that boys didn't cry, and resolved never to cry myself, instead redirecting sadness into anger, the masculine alternative. There was a catch, though. I still looked like a girl, and according to society, anger isn't for girls. I had been taught my whole life that I was not allowed to be angry. Furthermore, no one wants to be around a perpetually angry person regardless of gender. So I was stuck. The only negative emotion I was allowed in myself was anger, and then I was not allowed to express anger. Because anger isn't pretty, and anger isn't cool. The emotional repression and confusion took its toll. In high school, I would often imagine a scenario where someone would find me crying, and I would tell them, I'm not crying, because I'm not a girl. As time went on, that phrase began to hold more meaning as truth rather than wishful thinking. I was not a girl. This was not a concept that was easily conveyed to anyone else. If I wasn't a girl, then what was I? And so it wasn't something I could talk about with anyone, even my close friends and family members. Once I had a whole discussion with someone at my cousin's wedding about how I hated wearing the bridesmaid's dress because it wasn't me, without ever being able to explain anything more. And once I tried to tell my grandmother, who wanted to have a girls' night, but she looked at me and whispered, "But you have a vagina!" And I just didn't know how to counter that. I was even less secure in my gender presentation than a stereotypical 13-year-old boy. I was afraid of any and every trace of femininity, and overeager to prove my inner masculinity at every turn, to myself as well as others, whether it was appropriate or not. This manifested in unnecessary displays of physical ability and recklessness, like lifting heavy things, jumping from high places, and subjecting myself to and enduring pain. Often I would bring competitiveness into it, challenging my friends to races or asking them to dare me to do stupid stuff just so I'd have an excuse to do it, and even jokingly challenging them to physical fights. Overall, I was adamant to the point of being obnoxious about everything I thought made me masculine, from these physical feats to my choice of clothing, preference in music, and general eschewance of everything feminine, the only way I saw to prove who and what I really was. And then I came to Brown. And I found a place where I could be simply not a girl, where I learned that gender is not defined by your genitals, and that being transgender doesn't require surgery. Most importantly, I learned the word genderqueer. I like that word, although it took some getting used to, because while it conveys the information about being a non-binary gender, it's also vague enough not to mean anything more specific than that. It includes not a girl, it includes almost a boy, it includes something, I guess, but I'm not really sure what. My narrative changed from aggressively fighting an identity that didn't fit to exploring and building one that did, starting with the foundation of that single word. I finally had something to fill in the gaping black hole where a gender should be, an answer to my question. If I'm not a girl, what am I? I'm genderqueer. I'm still operating under the pressures of being perceived as a girl while fighting for an identity as a boy, or something. And that's even before bringing in manhood, which at least in my mind, as I've been taught, has to be earned on top of it all. But since coming out, the fight has become one against a gendered society, not against myself. As a result, I've actually become more okay with femininity in general. I'm no longer afraid that wearing a dress without a melodramatic show of reluctance will somehow turn me into a girl. And sometimes I'll dress up, makeup and all, voluntarily, but only when I want to, for occasions that I deem worthy. And then I'll feel like a dude in a dress, and I'll know that there's nothing wrong with that. At the end of the day, I'll still be genderqueer. And that's pretty cool.